Tile matching games are among the oldest type of video games in existence. And ever since the rise of browser-based flash games and mobile games, they've seen an unprecedented popularity due to their simplistic nature and their ability to quickly fill 5 minutes of dead time you spent on a commute or on the toilet. And at some point, a few developers realized that they could use that simple gameplay and merge it with other genres and mechanics to create entirely new experiences. One of those resulting games is Battlechef Brigade. At its core, Battlechef Brigade has two main mechanics. One is the aforementioned tile matching, which in this case comes in the traditional match-free flavor. You have 3 color-coded tiles to match that in theory should represent flavors, though I'm not entirely certain how water, fire and earth can be considered flavors, but we'll let that slide for now. As behooves of a match-3 game, the challenges start simple and get progressively more complex with the introduction of poison tiles and bone tiles, the former of which need to be removed before serving a dish, while the latter can be combined to form a wildcard object that can be paired with any given flavor to enhance it. The second type of mechanic is a side-scrolling hack-and-slash affair by which you have to acquire the raw ingredients to cook with, since you can't just rely on an infinite pantry of ingredients. Both of these ideas sound neat in theory, and their combination makes thematic sense. Juggling the time limit between hunting and cooking adds a nice twist to the otherwise generally laid-back atmosphere that these match-3 games usually have. However, both of these aspects seem a bit underdeveloped. The match-3 mechanic remains fairly simple over the course of the game. As I mentioned before, while superficially the game is about cooking and flavor, what you're actually combining is 3 of the 4 classical elements: water, earth and fire. To me, it seems like a bit of a missed opportunity to not actually go with more culinary terms like sweet, sour, salty or umami. I mean, I can understand how fire can represent spicy or hot food, but otherwise it somewhat misses the mark thematically. And it doesn't really matter which types of ingredients you use to make a dish, it all goes together to form something edible in the end. Imagine if that's how real cooking worked and you mix together caviar, chocolate, pop rocks, pizza dough and garlic and somehow still produce some world-class dish. The only requirement is that you use ingredients from a specific plant or animal in any given dish, but that requirement is filled by using a single ingredient of said required plant or animal, and the rest is up to you. Now I stress I don't find the match-3 mechanic to be bad, it's just that it could have been used in a more creative and thematically fitting fashion beyond the simple way it's implemented. Now what could have been significantly improved, however, is the side-scrolling hack-and-slash portion of the game. It's equally simplistic as the match-3 mechanic in the sense that there's no real challenge or strategy to any of it. Each battle gives you a biome to explore that has a unique mix of flora and fauna for you to collect ingredients from. But while the creatures do fight back at you for invading their habitat, there's no challenge to fighting them and gathering the ingredients they drop. It mostly just comes down to mashing the attack button at them until they die. There are a few creatures that require somewhat of a quote-unquote strategy, but it's not really that challenging. Honestly, the most taxing aspect of these sections is remembering which creatures drop which ingredients so you have enough of any given type to satisfy the required earth, water or fire dominance in your dish. It's unfortunate that a game that implements a superficially quite robust looking set of combat controls into a gameplay scenario that doesn't make any real use out of it. And it also doesn't help that the controls are rather floaty, which probably stems from the fact that the animations somehow don't really match the speed at which characters are moving. This is especially apparent for this orc character you get to control for one of the chapters, whose walk cycle clearly looks like it would result in a much slower walking speed than he actually has. Which brings me nicely to the visual aspect of the game. Now I generally like the aesthetic of the game. The hand-drawn characters and backgrounds are charming, and especially the characters are well designed and instantly recognizable both in terms of their silhouettes as well as the way they're dressed and colored. But I have to say that some of the backgrounds feel a bit phoned in. I'm sure this must have been a conscious decision of the developers to let certain spaces in the game look as if they're somewhat unfinished, but for that to work it must be a consistent element in all parts of the game. Because if only these few interiors look unfinished, it seems more like a mistake rather than a deliberate stylistic choice. But while the game and its assets might generally look good, once it all animates in front of you, it doesn't manage to keep the same level of polish. Animation is sparse, and it's really apparent that most characters didn't get a dedicated walk cycle. Whenever you challenge an opponent to a cooking duel, you'll see how your character Mina walks into the arena, since she has actual frames of animation for that, stilted and choppy though they may seem. But your opponent just materialize on the spot. And I know that this is mostly just visual fluff that you could easily skip and just focus on the actual gameplay, but it's little imperfections and inconsistencies like these that add up in the long run, especially when contrasted with the aspects of the game that are pulled off near flawlessly, like the excellent voice acting for the characters. Unfortunately, the story they get to voice act isn't all that amazing either. The concept behind Battle Chef Brigade seems like it's a deliberate homage to shonen anime, especially the tournament arc that many of those have. So obviously the world in which the game takes place in is all about cooking and these so-called battle chefs. The game opens up with some exposition about how 100 years ago monsters were a big problem for the people of Victusia. Eventually the Battle Chef Brigade was formed, which is tasked with hunting these monsters and cooking them to feed the population. And everything in this world seems to revolve around this stuff, which is obviously why every year there's a big tournament for aspiring chefs to enter the ranks of the Brigade. It's an incredibly threadbare setup for the events of the story, since nothing much beyond the tournament gets explored. Sure, during the tournament a plague infects the monsters and a secondary goal becomes dealing with the infection and the villain who caused it, but it seems more like an afterthought, a story made up on the spot to justify the gameplay curveball that Poison in the Match 3 portion represents, instead of a natural outgrowth of the story that wanted to be told. The first 4 chapters deal with Mina Han and her attempt to get into the Battle Chef Brigade by battling her way through the tournament. To that end, she has to duel someone every day. You could leave it at that, but there's also some ancillary stuff to do in order to earn money to buy certain items or upgrades in the shop. The one I enjoyed the most were the puzzles, which require you to achieve a certain score with a preset board that you have to match in a specific way to reach that score. It's the only one that really requires any skill or thought. The other 2 seem like phoned-in minigames that were just added to give you more to do. Now, while the cooking minigame that asks for specific flavor layouts is fine, I guess, the monster hunts are just pathetic. It unnecessarily draws additional attention towards the lackluster hack-and-slash gameplay, and it generally just feels like a waste of time, in more ways than one. As I mentioned before, the reason you'll want to play these minigames is to earn money. But to make that an appealing proposition, you need to offer the players something that's worth buying. And that's where the game stumbles a bit. From all the available items and upgrades, I'd say that there are maybe half a dozen that are actually worth getting, which are mostly just the pans that allow you to upgrade flavors with just 2 instead of 3 ingredients, or the ones that automatically upgrade ingredients or get rid of poison while you're doing something else. While I like the idea of giving players different loadouts to tackle the varying challenges, it's kinda undone by the fact that you have to choose which item to bring to any battle before you even know what's asked of you. There's no point in bringing the pan that promotes fire and nothing else when you have no idea if fire is even going to be requested of you. Why not tell you what the upcoming challenge is about first and letting you then decide what to bring with you? This way you just cause your players to forfeit any given round and try again with an adjusted loadout. The game is also rather short overall, to the point where it needlessly draws out its running time by having you play as a different character in Chapter 5 who has to deal with his wife's illness. It's blatantly and transparently filler, almost like in a real anime. The eventual resolution to the whole plague thing is also extremely anticlimactic. It's just another cooking duel, because obviously this world offers a trial by cooking instead of a sensible way of determining guilt and the punishment thereof. I also have to mention at the end here that the game frustrated me for technical reasons. For some reason the game simply wouldn't remember the resolution I set it to. Or it would, but the game just ignored them and tried to load in an absurdly low resolution like 800 by 600, and I had a ridiculously hard time to get it back to 1440p. It didn't help that the only workaround the developers offered in the forums was to hack the .ini files, which didn't even work in my case. What ended up working for me was to put the game into windowed mode every time I decided to stop playing. That way the game remembered the resolution and display mode when I booted it up again, and from that point I could put it into full screen mode. Now I stress, I generally like the idea of the gameplay, both the match-free stuff as well as the hunting for ingredients aspect, and I had fun with that. But the game is let down by a lack in combat system and a story and setting that are severely underdeveloped to make paying attention to the story worthwhile. You could just as well skip all the dialogue and most of the minigames and just focus on the duels, because everything around them is just so basic. It's not that I wouldn't recommend Battle Chef Brigade, but in this case I would only do so to people who are there for the match-free stuff and can stomach some light but shallow hack and slash gameplay.